5 minutes and counting.
There's been another mass shooting in America. This time in a...
Next time you go to Disney World with your children, you'll have to start scanning their fingers. Disney said the new process is going to help block the use of stolen and shared tickets. Now, if you remember, it used to be that tickets for children aged 3 to 9 would have been easy to transfer because they had no finger images attached to them. Well, Disney says parents who feel uncomfortable with having their kids' fingers scanned, you can use yours instead.
Lafayette approves a new ordinance that bans discrimination based on one's gender identity or veteran status. Council members voted with no hesitation in a unanimous vote tonight to ensure transgendered people are protected. News 18's Alexis Moberger joins us now and reports not everyone in attendance was on board with tonight's decision. Alexis?
Brittany, all council members voted tonight in support of passing a policy that protects a variety of people, including transgendered people. The meeting started off with Lafayette's mayor backing this ordinance to make the city a more progressive and inclusive place. But others at tonight's meeting felt the ordinance did just the opposite.
Public restrooms are an everyday challenge for Sky Brown.
Always trying to gauge if I'm being perceived as male or female in any given setting.
Brown identifies as they, their, or them, and is one of many transgendered people working towards a safer future. Brown is fearful how people will judge when walking into a public restroom.
Because of my experiences with violence, a lot of times if I'm worried about there being too many people in a restroom, I just won't use restrooms, period, in public.
But now, Lafayette is making it illegal to discriminate anyone based on their gender identity. For a second time, the City Council voted unanimously to amend an ordinance that already addresses race, sex, religion, sexual orientation, and more. And for Brown, this new ordinance is a step in the right direction.
Very appreciative that the vote was made this way because I think it does set a precedent for future policy, procedural, and cultural changes.
I'm a little disappointed about it because we start making decisions like this, it's going to get worse.
Many against the amendment have concerns centered around restroom use and the safety of children. Mark Dutton and others spoke out about those concerns.
I can't control everything. I just got to do my part, and that's what I tried to do tonight.
The city of West Lafayette may fine pet owners if their animal ends up at a local shelter. News 18's Kiara Lake reports on the importance of the fines, but also how to avoid them.
The city of West Lafayette approved an ordinance last night to protect lost and neglected animals by getting them microchipped. In return, this keeps residents in the area safe. The Almost Home Humane Society sees about 150 pets from West Lafayette a year. Executive Director Stacy Rogers highly recommends getting them microchipped.
I would highly recommend it. It's really the best way to make sure your pet's going to get back to you as soon as possible.
The microchip is implanted underneath the animal's skin and programmed with the owner's contact information. This will be done to all impounded animals thanks to an ordinance passed Tuesday by the City Council.
You know, it's just a quick injection, just like getting a vaccine for your pet, and it's going to be there for the rest of their life.
If an animal is impounded, the ordinance states that the owner has 4 days to pay a fine of $10 for the first offense, $20 for each offense in that same year. The owner will also be responsible for boarding and microchip implant fees. Mayor John Dennis was behind the ordinance. His dog was microchipped and he has seen no negative side effects.
And we had the chip put in her and it has changed her in no way. She's still a great, big, friendly, loving dog.
There are a lot of things that can happen to animals if treated irresponsibly.
Being a pet owner requires some degree of responsibility. And one of those responsibilities is properly chipping and identifying your dog.
In 2012, quadriplegic Jan Schuerman fed herself for the first time using a robotic hand controlled by her thoughts. A sensor was wired into her brain which read her neural activity. Now researchers are working towards making those types of sensors wireless and tiny, smaller than a grain of sand. Hardly visible to the naked eye, this is what so-called neural dust looks like under a microscope. In rat experiments, researchers have proven that these tiny implantable machines can record neural activity in real time.
There's a lot of excitement about the possibilities of being able to use neural signals, whether from the peripheral system or the central nervous system, to, control and actuate some motor prosthetic. And that might be a limb prosthetic, it might be an exoskeleton, it might be something more advanced, like a speech generator.
That's still a long way off, but this new research is a big step towards making it a reality. In the near term, these tiny sensors may change the way we monitor our health.
You can almost think of it as the sort of internal deep tissue Fitbit type of thing, right? Where you would be just collecting a lot of data that today we think of as very hard to access.
Current medical technologies employ a range of wired electrodes attached to different parts of the body to monitor and treat diseases ranging from heart arrhythmia to epilepsy. The idea here is to make those types of technologies wireless. The researchers are working on enabling their neural dust to transmit data into the body as well. This would transform these sensors into potential tools to treat neurological disorders. The next step is to make neural dust even smaller. So far, scientists have been able to use their sensors on the peripheral nervous system. To work in the brain, they need to be about 50 microns in size, the width of a single human hair.
Oh, you never want to see scenes like this playing out. This was actually heavy rain that rocked parts of Austria on Sunday. Mudslides in the village called Fritz am See. Now, the mudslides damaged dozens of homes. As you saw, just covered entire sections of the town. The mayor described the situation saying that literally half the city is under mud. That is not good. And look at how much weight that mud is carrying. Now, luckily, officials have not reported any deaths from these mudslides, but oh my goodness, we feel for these people. What a mess. What do you think about this? There's a lot of debate going on over this photo and whether it may have been photoshopped. You be the judge as you check out this photo. It's definitely cool. It looks like a giant eye high up in the clouds. An anonymous photographer, supposedly snapped this in Astana, which is the capital of Kazakhstan, and it's gone viral. As you can imagine, the comments are just pouring in. One person says it looks like the, quote, eye of God. Someone else got the feeling that Big Brother is watching. And one commenter brought the conversation back to earth, saying, although it is a little scary looking, it's probably just an illusion made of water vapor and light. I don't know about you, but I'm waiting for it to wink. Flash flooding rocked Greece on Wednesday, causing 4 deaths, with 1 person still missing. As you can see, the damage is very extensive. 7 communities in the southern Peloponnese region were cut off by flooding. And you're seeing the images just as we are. I mean, cars piled on top of each other due to the flash floods. The water inundated hundreds upon hundreds of homes and businesses in the area. And rescue crews said they received more than 1,000 distress calls and had to rescue more than 70 people. The mayor of one community, Kalamata, said he had never seen anything like it.
So in light of the very strong earthquake that we had in Oklahoma, north of Oklahoma City, this was on Saturday. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if you live there. The USGS has gone back and done a little bit of reanalysis, not only on that earthquake, but the one that it was tied with in 2011 for being the strongest earthquakes, both of them, in Oklahoma recorded history. All right. And in their reanalysis, using a lot of data that they have available, they found that they upgraded the 2011 Stillwater area earthquake to a 5.7. Okay, these were both initially 5.6. So 2011 one got upgraded to 5.7. This one got upgraded to a 5.8. All right, so that makes this earthquake that we just had on Saturday the strongest earthquake in Oklahoma history.
The aftermath of devastating mudslides in Guatemala. Emergency workers and local residents dig for survivors after 9 people were killed. The night before, the bodies of the victims were recovered. The concrete houses with their corrugated iron roofs in this poor neighborhood were turned to rubble. Emilio Vega lost his wife in the mudslide, and his son is still missing.
I told my wife, we have to wait for the rain to pass, and then we'll leave. But she was worried about the house, that it was going to get flooded. Leave everything, I told her.
The mudslides were triggered by heavy rains, and a spokesman for the National Emergency Service blamed a poor drainage system for the tragedy. Last year, Guatemala had one of its worst ever natural disasters when nearly 300 people were killed in a mudslide.
Maybe you've tried to figure out this mystery yourself. For decades, thrill seekers have been trekking deep into the Michigan woods at night to see this. This is called the mysterious Paulding Light. So this is a shot of it during the daytime. You obviously saw the shot at night. And these guys are some enterprising engineering students that went out a few years ago to investigate what those bright white lights were. Because as you saw, they get bigger, they get smaller, and then they actually just fade away back into the night once again. So people were wondering, is this paranormal? Is it swamp gas? Well, the students came to the conclusion that it was just headlights off in the distance. But, you know, whatever it is, people are no doubt going to continue to make that journey to see these lights for years to come.
Hurricane Newton has given western Mexico a hammering, but despite the first reported loss of life, the popular tourist resort of Cabo San Lucas knows it could have been a whole lot worse. At least 2 people are dead and 3 missing after a fishing vessel was wrecked by the storm as holidaymakers hunkered down in their hotels.
It felt like one of the hurricane was going through and then it would calm down, and then later on it came really stronger after that. We were hearing a lot of boats were going and the sounds of the boats were pushing around. And in fact, this morning we saw one of the boats turned over in the water from that.
The Category 1 hurricane hit Cabo San Lucas on Tuesday with winds of 150 kilometers per hour. Heading north, it has Arizona in its sights. It's expected to arrive in the U.S. state as a tropical storm. Cabo San Lucas still remembers the severe battering it took 2 years ago when a stronger storm, Hurricane Odile, caused extensive damage.
We begin with worldwide condemnation and concern after North Korea tested its most powerful nuclear weapon yet. The North claims its ballistic missiles can now carry nuclear warheads. The overnight test triggered a magnitude 5.3 tremor near North Korea's main nuclear base.
South Korea and Japan called the test reckless and unacceptable. And President Obama, returning from a trip to Asia, promised serious consequences. Adriana Diaz is in Beijing, where China is also protesting its allies' latest move. Adriana, good morning.
Good morning. This is North Korea's second nuclear test this year alone, and its largest yet. This comes just after the U.S. and South Korea held joint military exercises last month, and amid planning for a U.S. missile defense shield on the Korean peninsula. That's angered the North and further complicated an already tense situation.
North Korea said overnight the test was performed on a newly developed nuclear warhead at a remote site used for previous nuclear tests. South Korean officials scrambled together an emergency meeting. And on his way back from Asia, President Obama had separate phone calls with South Korea's president and the Japanese prime minister. The test violates 5 UN Security Council resolutions and undermines regional stability. Secretary of State John Kerry addressed the test from Geneva.
We're trying still to monitor to find out precisely what took place.
Earlier this week, Pyongyang caused more concern when they launched 3 missiles while China was hosting world leaders at the G20 summit. And yesterday at a regional summit in Laos, President Obama condemned what he called provocations.
We are constantly examining other strategies that we can take.
Pyongyang's nuclear program is a source of national pride. When we visited in May, the nation showcased a parade float celebrating their January 6th nuclear test. That month, in a 3-hour speech, leader Kim Jong-un pledged to use nuclear weapons only in self-defense.
Every time we condemn them, they come back at us with another test.
Joshua Pollack is an expert on nuclear and missile proliferation.
If you read their statements in the last few days, I think it has become increasingly clear that they have more planned for us even before the end of this year.
China, North Korea's only major ally, had harsh words for Pyongyang, condemning the nuclear test. China also said it would lodge a formal complaint with North Korea's ambassador here. Gail?
Adriana Diaz in Beijing, thank you.
Now, Russia says its fighter jets intercepted U.S. military spy planes as they're trying to snoop on Russian army exercises over the Black Sea. According to Russian Defense Ministry, U.S. planes twice tried to get close to the Russian border over the Black Sea without their transponders on. Ministry also says the Russian jets were dispatched, quote, in strict accordance with international rules. Pentagon has slammed Russia's move as unsafe, saying a fighter jet flew within 10 feet of a U.S. naval surveillance aircraft. Russian jets have also intercepted U.S. Air Force reconnaissance planes several times over the Baltic Sea since the beginning of 2016. And now joining us out of Orlando, Florida for more on the story is Mr. Scott Rickard, a former American intelligence linguist. Hello, Mr. Rickard. Thanks for joining us here on Press TV's Top 5. Now, sir, what are the dangers of these close calls between the U.S. and Russia during a time, that is, when the world doesn't really need another war or conflict?
Well, these kinds of actions have been going on for decades. The Russians constantly would fly next to American reconnaissance aircraft, always within quite close proximity, a lot of times even doing barrel rolls and getting up underneath the aircraft and hitting their afterburners. You know, these kinds of incidents aren't uncommon. Now, what is uncommon is you have the Americans who are continually probing, you know, not only the Russian territories, but also China, Iran, unfortunately, and many other countries around the world with these quote-unquote reconnaissance aircraft. Now, this particular aircraft in question, the P-8, now let's be clear here, this is not a reconnaissance aircraft. It has anti-ship missiles, it has anti-torpedo capability, anti-submarine torpedo capability that is just tremendously outflanks most of the equipment that any other country in the world has. And the fact that they're flying without transponders on and teasing the Russians as they fly towards the Russian border, you know, the Russians are actually showing quite a bit of patience, and they're certainly protecting their sovereignty and their land. You know, certainly you don't see Russians flying warplanes, not reconnaissance planes, but warplanes, planes equipped with this kind of armament right up to the American border, because there'd be a lot of noise, and certainly the Iranians aren't doing that as well.
It's funny you should mention that, because that leads me right into my second question. If Moscow was just miles off the U.S. coast, ghosting U.S. military exercises with similar aircraft, how would Washington respond to that?
Well, I'll tell you, there'd be every news agency in the country would be covering it. They'd be making big news out of this, and they certainly wouldn't be putting it in the point that the Americans were doing something wrong protecting their borders. In fact, what's interesting here is that the Russians are doing nothing wrong. In fact, they've been extremely patient, not just in recent times, but through just decades upon decades. The Chinese have had to deal with, if you look at what happened on Hainan Island, when they shot down the predecessor to the P-8, the P-3E, it was actually truly a signals intelligence reconnaissance aircraft. They didn't really shoot it down, there was a collision back then, and that was about 15 years ago. And it's indicative, the Americans, obviously flying very close, if not within Chinese airspace. And unfortunately, in that incident, there was an accident where, oddly enough, the pilot's name was Wang Wei, which in English it sounds like wrong way. He accidentally ran into the P-3. And in this case, the Russian pilots, these are highly skilled pilots. These are fighter pilots. They're some of the best pilots in the world, just like the American pilots. And these pilots are, extremely skilled in what they're doing, and there was absolutely no danger to the P-8 aircraft. And so I believe here what we see here is a true hypocrisy. These aircraft, if this kind of armament was being flown along the American borders, there'd be a massive uprising in not only the media, the government, and the people.
Nominal first stage performance. T-minus 5 minutes and counting.
There's been another mass shooting in America. This time in a